going to be resolutely old-fashioned here. And one of the great pleasures of being in a library is, of course, not only reading, but being read to. So if you reach back into when you were in kindergarten or first grade and you had a librarian or a teacher read to you, and that's what I'm going to do today. Because I'm going to deliver a little talk called Why Books Still Matter. And to actually ask that question is to beg it, do they still matter? So we'll continue it there. And books have a lot of explaining to do these days. Bibliophiles and even publishers are treated with a fair amount of suspicion. And who can blame them? Most of us carry on like old-fashioned fetishists. You can hear us gushing over the beautiful object of the book, that 700-year-old feat of perfect engineering. You might see us in raptures over the grain of paper, the pacing of illustrations, the choreography of typeface and design. We'll bore you with the sensual pleasures of the book, its smell and feel, the way in which a fine book ages. And we'll study marginalia for its human record of our desire to enter a book physically, to literally work our way into or impress ourselves onto another's mind. But when you think about it, what could actually be more human than a book? We speak of its body intimately, name its parts like joints and hinges. How many of us cringe when somebody takes a book and cracks it open? And that's called breaking a spine. Does it get more violent than that? and yet, at the same time, all of this object love is beginning to sound a bit quaint, like the sentimental mumblings of a Luddite. But there are even more sinister charges against defenders of the book these days. Copyright holders themselves, like me, are accused of being enemies of progress and democracy. Green teams deplore our use of natural resources to make books. Libraries groan under the weight of our production. Some look forward to the day in which we can etherize books online and commit what my friend at the Beinecke Library once called bibliographic euthanasia. But those who hate and fear the book have populated its history from the beginning. Even more insidious is the production of the book's demise by the enthusiasts of the internet. One has to wonder why the great rhetoric against books has become so hostile. Is it because books do in fact still matter? My own personal library doesn't seek revenge against the internet. But am I alone in detecting the aggressive tone of those who celebrate the virtual library at the expense of the physical book? Does one technology necessarily obliterate another? So, I stand here old-fashioned, and it's difficult not to sound threatened when we're defending the book, especially when the enemies of the book assume that the war is already over and they won. Before launching the iPad and the iBook store, Steve Jobs of Apple actually said, "No one reads books anymore, that's over." And if that were not scary enough, he then went on to say how one accesses information will become more important than how processes it. I was on a few panels where I've actually referenced that quote as the devil speaking. And in the same platform, I've had people reference it as the future and the great hope. So there's a lot of tension here. And a hostile blogger from the Daily Cause once said, "We no longer have to depend on the so-called self-appointed experts to tell us what we should think." So it's really come to this. With a day when the self-appointed experts who write books are finally taken down by the self-appointed experts who write blogs. And whom should we trust? The career expert who writes books and deliberate over their content for decades and researching for years, or the temporary experts who form the chattering class on the blogosphere? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't hate the blogosphere or website writing. I love them, I've done it, I've written on them, and I read them, and I recognize what goes on in them is very different than what goes on in books. And I don't believe that the expansion and growth of the internet has to mean the death of books. So here's a true confession. I love books more. I always have. As a son of immigrant parents, I befuddled and even alarmed my parents about my affection for books. I took any chance to lose myself in books, so I've always regarded reading as more a kind of engagement than a kind of escapism. I never got that charge against them. My dad used to yell, "Go outside," he would implore. And during grade school, I would sometimes forgo my lunch, asking my parents for a quarter so that I could buy a hot meal, and then I would lie to the school telling them I brought my lunch and I was going home. Then I would sneak into the woods, hide behind the woods in the library, pocket my quarter, and then every 3 months buy a nice stack of Scholastic Book Club books and bring them home. And when I collected enough to have a little library, I challenged my sister to blindfold me and to test my ability to name a book and its publisher by touch and smell alone. It's a bit obsessive, I but I was right more times than I wasn't. And these books awakened in me attention as a reader. I spent as much time trying to suspend my awareness of the book as a medium and getting lost in the dream of the narrative. And I've devoted my entire adult life to publishing, and despite that, I still think the books matter, or ought to. But there's a lot of evidence right now that points to a troubled future for the book. Here are some stats. The Progress in International Reading Literary Study reports that reading, writing, comprehension tests taken by 10-year-olds around the world are declining in really radical levels. Two NEA reports made national headlines when they revealed that literary reading in America is not only declining rapidly among all groups, but the rate of decline has accelerated, especially among the young. So, what to do? Telling us that reading books is good for us is not persuasive. No one likes having their leisure time legislated or prescribed. And if it proves true that we prefer getting our news and entertainment from streaming media, TV, hyperlinked text, what does that mean for us as human beings? Does the book still matter in our evolution as a species? Will it lose out to content that is atomized, discontinuous, born digital? Still, it's not the format that matters most. I mean, lots of you probably read on the Kindle, and the genre is actually immaterial, but it really is how books add up cognitively in the aggregate, in the sort of universal consciousness. So if modern America is a nation built on ideas rather than manufacturing, publishing is that nexus in which they meet. Technology is where the expression of desire meets the undertow of fear. Knowledge requires tools that can make our lives smarter, easier, and more pleasurable. That is all to the good, but our zeal for new technology needs to be tempered with a skeptical awareness of its implications. As a culture, we're always better at gauging what there is to gain rather than what there is to lose. Look at the environment. So Google, of course, is the big engine searching for change. Having scanned the giant libraries of Harvard, Stanford, Michigan, Oxford, and the Republic, they have made available millions of works that were orphaned by their out-of-print and out-of-copyright status. Google's goal is to build a comprehensive library of all the books in the world. Imagine that, a kind of virtual Alexandria. Publishers, while wary, have profited from this interest of their deep backlist into the light of day that Google searches into. Writing about the idea of the universal library excites some people to a kind of state of utopian hysteria. Kevin Kelly, the self-appointed senior maverick of Wired magazine, you've got to love that title. Senior implies authority, maverick implies iconoclast. Together they cancel the rest of us out. But they grant him the power to call anyone he disagrees with a destructive dinosaur. At any rate, Kelly writes that plans like Google's will allow all the books in the world to become a single liquid fabric of interconnected words and ideas. The universal library and its books, in quotes, will be unlike any library or books we have known before, pushing us rapidly towards that Eden of everything and away from the paradigm of the physical paper tome as the hot technology of the search engine. So what these great digital libraries will accomplish, hopefully, is a kind of conversation among each other, sharing patterns of use and user-created metadata, recording behaviors and interests of readers. Books reference other books and drill down to source materials. They transform from an author-driven event to a user-driven tool. And in a sense, these digital libraries will breathe life into the countless numbers of footnotes accumulated over centuries. But even then, it's not going to be complete. That's a pipe dream. Books are only a part, often a selective synthesis of the record of human experience. Nonetheless, the Google Library Project is a great boon to scholars. In The Bookless Future, David Bell writes the following fantasy as he's doing a research for a book on the Cultural War in Napoleonic Europe. I'm in a coffee shop on a university campus. A passage from Edinburgh's Letters on a Regicide Peace comes to mind, but I can't remember the exact wording. Finding the passage as little as 5 years ago would have required going to the library, locating the book on the shelf or not, and paging through the text in search of a half-remembered material. Instead, on my laptop, I open Internet Explorer, connect to the wireless campus network. Seconds later, I have found the entire text online. I search for the word foreign doctrine, and up comes the quote. Time elapsed, less than 1 minute. So that's a pretty cool description, right? Of a brave, new, hypersensitive, hyper-convenient world of scholarship in the humanities and social sciences, revolutionized by new access to information. a technology which has put so much primary and secondary source material online. But the great irony, if not the blind spot, in the description of all this hyperlinked research in a world collapsed of time and travel in service of nothing less than the writing of his next book. I'd like to try to get at the experience of the character of reading a book online versus doing research online. From the tablet, to the scroll, to the codex, to the printed book, we've been looking for the optimal device for recording information since reading developed. Portability, usability distinguish the book from the start, which explains why it has lasted some 700 years. Technology did not destroy the concept of the book, it enhanced its nature and quickened its production. The rise of computers did not at first threaten the book either. Screens of PCs were friendlier to spreadsheets of information that needed to be scrolled through rather than read through. Users of PCs preferred to toggle between applications rather than proceed sequentially through a linear document. Sustained reading on a large screen makes the eyes glaze, the back ache. Most troubling, the concentration fails, attention wanders. It wants to scan and skim, toggle, hyperlink. Reading on screen makes you want to do what is easy to do there, search and discover. Strategize how to get at the information you need. You are not forced to surrender to any organizing principles established by the author or to follow the path of argumentation she has laid out for you. You won't have to make marginal notes or themes to trace throughout the text and circle footnotes whose source you want to check online. It's all a link away. But you're also missing something important. Searching around in electronic text, you can skim and cut and paste, but you will read things out of a deliberate context and sequence that the author has devised. You might discover the nut more quickly, but you will miss out learning how the author arrived at her conclusion. Merriam-Wolfe writes how we are how we read. Emails, blogs, hyperlinks, pop-up ads, news alerts, etc. require very different intelligence that's needed by a sustained and deep reading experience. We may become mere decoders of information. Steve Jobs again. Whether the book can be enhanced by becoming a hypertext online is a very important question to publishers and editors. We need to anticipate the new skills required for preparing text that will spawn out of real-time discussion online. Writers will negotiate collaborative development of content that is never static, always expanding. Readers will personalize their books with annotations and hyperlinks to personal journals, documentary history, video, maps, photos, tables and charts that link to live updates. The beginning and ending of text will be porous and shifting. They will lead the reader to discussion forums, social bookmarking sites, reader reviews, and then further open those venues to email lists and social networks. To my mind, all these benefits enhance rather than replace the experience of deep reading in a book. To some extent, it's what should happen after a group of people read a book, whether in a book group or a classroom or a library that spills over into a cafe or online. We have an author, Timothy Garton-Nash, who's now writing a book on international freedom of speech. And he's doing a very interesting experiment in how he's writing this book, chapter by chapter online, inviting all kinds of people to come in and tangle with his work. And will then actually appropriate all of that into the book. So the sort of social networking of the concept in his research becomes part of the research. And, but let's not forget that at some point, all of that work has to stop and be marked by a physical moment in time and a physical object, the book. So is there a downside to all of this exciting prospects online? Only insofar as the futuristic fantasy rejects the centrality of the book, or sees the book outside the universal library as a fish out of its aquarium gasping for air. One has to wonder whether there will be a cognitive cost to the migrating of scholarship away from the reading and writing of books. I think of my own behavior online versus browsing the stacks of a library. When I first came to Yale about 11 years ago, I spent a Saturday wandering the stacks of the great Sterling Library and wanted nothing more than never to leave the building and take out for the rest of my life. I'll be just fine. Browsing the stacks was an invitation to a kind of serendipity. I was excited by the distractions I would find on the way to what I was looking for. Researching online, I feel more as if I were playing a video game, dodging pop-up ads, as if I were fighting asteroids with a joystick. The kinds of things that came my way were impositions rather than accidents and discoveries, targeted by mysterious and possibly venal algorithms rather than discovered by curiosity. Another discomforting aspect of the search imperative is that the very agency that allows you to collect information is collecting information about you. Not to sound a big brother alarm, but it's important to remember that today our content providers and search engines are for-profit corporations whose motives are, at best, not transparent. To use the collaborative filtering, or maybe we should be talking about conscious uncoupling of some search engines, is to dance with a partner who has long hands, as my mother used to warn my sister. Online marketing strategies want to disguise themselves as a service, customized to your needs, rather than a tool to manipulate your desires in a medium that's too new to learn defenses against. So libraries and bookstores, on the other hand, protect your privacy. A public annotation of a digital text is called a tag, and I often feel like I'm playing tag when reading or responding on a blog, strategizing how to outrun, hide from, or make contact with whoever is it. Unlike that singular attention the printed book relies on, the internet needs a multiplicity of users who believe in it, like an audience clapping for Tinkerbell to survive. Even as web indexing proves our online writing to be less original than we thought, we shout louder to be recognized within the din. The question becomes not so much who can be heard, but who ought to be listened to. The democratic ideal guarantees that every voice can be heard, but does not insist that every voice must be heard. Who decides which voice should rise above the noise of the blogosphere? Traditionally, that's been the role of the publisher, the evil gatekeepers, to select, develop, and edit, to equip with bibliographic back matter, to design and manufacture. In the age of information, in which research and information is not only accessible but ubiquitous, it is imperative that we always ask ourselves every day, what needs to be a book, now more than ever? There's no secret that university presses have experienced a crisis in the last decade, and the decade before that, and the one before that as well. Constriction of library budgets, continued specialization, professionalization of academic disciplines have diminished readers of scholarly monographs. Production costs have increased, used books cut into backlist sales, and course packs cannibalize adoption market for textbooks. The marketplace demands that we ask that question, what needs to be a book? And particularly, what needs to be a scholarly monograph? And aside from tenure and career advancement issues, what does a university press have to publish? And what is a monograph anyway? Webster has a pretty inelegant definition, a written account of a single thing. Yale strolling professor of English, David Bromwich, wants to find it as a work of scholarship that will not sell many copies. Until it does, at which point it becomes a gem of scholarship. And while there was certainly a twinkle in his eye, the distinction has actually become a pretty useful one that we discuss a lot. How do we, what's in common, what are the things that separate a gem of scholarship from a monograph? And a monograph, pretty much has to have original primary research, a kind of blindness to fashion, a love of the ignored and the arcane, a rigorous methodology, a compound argument, a scholarly apparatus that not only amplifies the text, but enables the reader to reconstruct and replicate the original research. Where then might the two part company? How could a monograph be cut to resemble a lapidary gem? And so we came up with these sort of qualities. The research demonstrates a passionate commitment, an almost athletic joy in uncovering and managing masses of research material. The structure invents a new model of managing that complexity. The prose contributes terminology to the lingua franca of the discipline. It challenges yet can be understood by educated non-specialists. As Einstein said, everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. The book crosses disciplines with ease, listens to its own internal echoes, and while perhaps narrow in scope, the book feels close. You can feel the breath of the intellect on the page. I think you all know what I'm talking about, I'm sure of it. You've all been entranced by the seamlessness of a narrative story and dazzled by the marshalling of dozens of arguments in service of a grand theory. You've been transformed within the alchemy of literature. You have been moved by a book. Thank you.